The focus of this first session is how can governments get organised for fintech? And the context here is very much, as we heard from Valentina there in particular, how fast this sector has grown, both in terms of the scale and the pace of change that we are seeing. It really impacts across government, so across government departments, across professions, across sectors. So the question that we have put to our speakers to think about today, which they're going to give some opening presentations on, is how are governments getting organised in terms of governing fintech? Are they looking at appointing leaders for fintech? If so, where do those leaders sit within government organisations? Do they sit in their finance organisations? Do they sit in their innovation teams? Because we've heard a lot about the importance of facilitating innovation as well. So that's the context for this first session. I'm delighted to say that we have Karen Cullen here, who is Head of International Financial Services Unit at the Department of Finance in Ireland. We have Doris Dietzer, who is Head of Digital Finance at the Payment Services and Cybersecurity Division of the Ministry of Finance in Germany. And we have Marie-Lise Cook, who is Head of Innovation Department at the Financial Supervision and Resolution Authority here in Estonia. So, Karen, I'm going to invite you first to give some comments.
Hi Siobhan, and thanks for the invitation to participate today. It's great to be back at in-person events and be able to talk to one another and talk about what's working for them and learn from one another. And thanks to Ian and Global Government FinTech for the event and the Minister for Finance of Estonia for hosting us. I think I was last here in 2017 when Estonia held the presidency. It sounds like a really long time ago, but it feels like it was just a few months ago. It's amazing how time flies. My name is Karen Cullen. I'm responsible for FinTech in Ireland at the Department or Ministry of Finance. And I head up the team responsible for the strategy for international financial services called Ireland for Finance. So I kind of wear two hats, and the two roles are related, and I explain why in a minute. So fintech is very important to us, both as an enabler of better services for citizens and businesses, and also as a source of resilient opportunities for people working in financial services. So fintech, or digital finance, as the EU Commission prefers to call it, is also a priority at EU level, and we feel strongly that it is an opportunity for Europe as a whole, and we are very active at a European level on the digital files that are part of the EU digital finance package, such as MiCA and DORA. So these opportunities for our domestic economy, our vibrant export-oriented sector, also come with risks, as the Minister of Finance mentioned this morning, that needs to be managed. And so how we organise ourselves for fintech is a big priority for Ireland. So as policymakers, the organisational approach we adopted on fintech is an extension of the whole of government and public-private collaboration model that we employ at the heart of the Ireland for Finance strategy. So in relation to the Ireland for Finance strategy and how I came to have responsibility for fintech, I just give some background to that. It influences how we are organising ourselves in this area. So Ireland for Finance, as I said, is as a whole of government strategy, which has a vision for Ireland to be a top-tier location of choice for specialist international financial services. To date, we have focused on employment as our core key performance indicator, and by that measure, the sector is thriving with over 52,000 people now working across the country, not just in our capital. It has developed from a standing start in the 1980s into an important and resilient part of the Irish economy, and the key to that success is the whole of government strategy. This means that my job involves orchestrating the relevant enterprise and education ministries and agencies from across government to create the right conditions to grow direct employment in international financial services. And with the assistance of our foreign missions abroad, we also bring our message to the international audience. So the Ireland for Finance strategy has partnership and collaboration with the private sector at its core. A major element of the Ireland for Finance strategies is harnessing opportunities in technology and innovation. And while the pandemic has accelerated the move to digital finance, it's a topic that I and my team have been working on for some years. In September 2020, the EU published its EU digital finance strategy, and it was clear from that strategy that we needed to adopt a whole-of-government approach. So this led us to formally establish our new fintech steering group in the Department of Finance. I chair this group, and it is focused on how we are uniquely positioned to benefit from global investment in fintech, given our experience in both technology and financial services. So we've leveraged off our Ireland for Finance cross-government group to date, and industry contacts and the industry committee. And now we're in the process of expanding the fintech steering group to include representatives from across government, and setting up working groups to allow the private sector, and I mean industry and academia, to a formal structure to feed into the fintech steering group in the department. So in summary, this fintech steering group is how we are organising ourselves to maximise the opportunities and minimise the risks of fintech. And the slide shows some of the members of the group, and I can say a little bit more about this in a few minutes.
Yes. Thanks so much, Karen. So a really good way to open. We will come back to you and I'll ask you a little bit more about your steering group, but really interesting to hear what you say about the importance of linking this to the Ireland for Finance strategy, how important that is for Ireland in terms of its international kind of reputation and its international strategy there. And interesting that you've already then set up this steering group and that you see this as a whole cross-government kind of initiative and way forward. So thank you so much for those opening remarks. Reminders of the audience, be noting all of this down and be thinking about the questions that you want to put to our great panel here today. Doris, I'm coming over to you now.
Yes, thank you very much. And also from my side, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure being here. It's my first time in Tallinn. And I'm very thankful to Karen for her opening and for mentioning also the European initiatives, because that leaves the possibility for me to focus on our national initiatives, because I couldn't agree more on what you said on the European level. It's far most important. Of course, a lot of music is playing there for fintechs, fintech regulation, and also other initiatives. With regard to Germany, why I'm here actually leads me directly to the question how we are organized in Germany when it comes to fintechs. And me, I'm leading the unit for digital finance and payment services. And that shows I basically, or my team exists because it was put on the political agenda about 6 years ago. So it was politics who said they want to have one of their priorities in fintechs, put their priority on fintechs. Why? Because they saw and still see that in order to have a competitive financial industry, you have to stay innovative, and a lot of innovation comes from fintechs themselves by offering new business models, but also by, I would say, putting pressure on traditional business models to adapt. So, and that is why there was a huge demand to have a political agenda on it. And that still remains with the new government. Most of you are probably aware that we had election last year in a new government, and that makes the topic even more important. It is part of our new political agreement between the three parties which are forming the current government. So fintech is still one of the priorities. And what does that have to do with our Ministry of Finance? How do we organize it? I think there are three pillars I would like to mention. The first one is like a political one. We have a kind of political, or we have politicians who identify with the topic. In our case, it's the minister himself and the state secretary, which makes the topic one of the priorities, digitization in general, but also fintechs. And that is kind of important sign and signal to the community that we take this topic serious and that we are really keen on improving here. Then we have the organizational part. That's basically me and my team. We kind of have different functions within the ministry. we kind of contact point for the business and the community outside. They can approach us, can share ideas with us, discuss things with us. But we are also kind of help desk, I would call it internally, because what we see at the moment, that a lot of things and issues which come out on my table are on my table because somewhere it says fintech or sometimes it says digital, and they all think, oh wait, that's our digital finance unit. But when you look closer and you see, well, actually it's investment, actually it's saving, actually it's trading. And then we have a kind of interaction with our colleagues to say, well, you're doing the saving part, of course we are helping with the technology part. So we have also this function. That means what kind of makes us different to the other colleagues is that our team consists not only of lawyers and economics, which is kind of typical for German administration, but we also have the pleasure to have now some IT experts with us. So that means we have different skills now compared to back then. Which are really needed. We also have different ways of communication by now. So we see in order to communicate with the community itself, the business community, but also internally, we need to adapt to whom we are talking to. And of course, it also changes the way we work internally together with other parts of the government and other parts of the ministry. And that is the second pillar, I would say. And the third one, which is probably most interesting for you here, is our Digital Finance Forum, we call it, which is an advisory board to the ministry. We had it already in the last government. There it was called the Fintech Council. We kind of renewed and reformed it. Under the new government, it's now the Digital Finance Forum. It consists of experts from the business community, and we by purpose called it Digital Finance and not Fintech Forum, because it consists not only of startups but also of traditional businesses as well. That is very important for us, because fintech and technology or digitalization is both not only news and startups but also traditional financial institutions which need to transform or are transforming. We are covering different sectors. The forum, we have one big sector that covers the whole area around payments, which we already heard is very digital and forerunning when it comes to innovation. Then we have a whole area and experts working on retail payments, on retail banking, sorry. And then we have an area on investment and crypto, and an area on insurance. And what we are hoping to do with this forum is to have overall topics which affects all of them, like gaining expertise, how tax and what have you, and funding, which is an issue for basically everyone. And then we have detailed expert meetings on these 4 areas I just mentioned, and we are hoping that these experts do develop a strategy until next year for German, a fintech strategy or digital finance strategy, which we can then go into detail. That's about the Digital Finance Forum. It was launched some weeks ago, which was very successful, and now we start the deep dive work. These are the main initiatives and structures we have in the Ministry of Finance. Next to it, I just want to mention briefly, of course, we have our supervisory authority, which is transforming to better engage and communicate with the business with the business community, because, of course, every fintech at one point has the question whether they need a license or not, and expertise has to be improved there too. Then we have in the German government a strategy just being developed on startups. And as I just mentioned before, the Digital Finance Forum and the Ministry of Finance, we are focusing not only on startups, but on all financial technology firms. But the startup strategy covers especially the needs and the interests of startups cross-sectoral. And one of the challenges is how to structure cross-sectoral initiatives and combine them with sectoral ones. But I think we come to that probably later. So these are some of the things we are doing currently, and this is all very new. And one of the learnings I just had is that if you really wanted to come forward in one of the topics, you really need the political will. It has to be one of the priorities, and organization and everything else then follows.
Thank you so much, Dora. I mean, so many issues there, I think, to unpick, and that will probably be resonating with the audience there. So as your three pillars, the kind of importance of ministers setting the context, and I think for civil servants, the challenge then as political cycles and administrations change, how do you keep that same kind of priority? How do you keep the same focus on it? The civil service organisation, as you say, the need to bring in different skills, to bring in IT experts, technology, innovation, all of those into kind of one area. And then interesting, comparing what you both said in terms of the kind of steering group, that you changed it from something that was called Fintech Council to something that's called the Digital Finance Forum. So kind of you're going the other way, I think. So it's really interesting already to see how different countries are approaching this in a different way. So thank you so much for those already. And now I'm going to invite Marie-Lise over to you.
Thank you for inviting me. Greetings to everyone. Maybe I will just use this moment to embrace that this is all female panel here. So it's nice to share the stage with you incredible women here. So yes, back to me. I'm Marie-Lise Cook, and professionally I head the innovation department at Estonian Financial Supervision Authority. To just give some context, and our organization is conducted to enhance the stability, reliability, and transparency of financial sector. And we do it in the interest of public, and of course our main aim is to protect the customers and investors. And we have almost 300 market participants licensed by us. And inside that organization we have established our innovation department. And inside that department, we are running Innovation Hub. And this is actually initiative that comes from Europe. 3 European supervisory authorities have actually set out this best practice, how to deal with fintech companies that are emerging from financial sector. And they have 3 different levels or layers to do that. The first is this simple contact point, which means that there is going to be this email address and a coordinator behind that. Then this second layer is Innovation Hub that we are running. This means that we are having basically this dedicated innovation team in our house, whose main responsibility is to be capable of doing most of this explanatory work regarding those new business models. If needed, then also we can enlist thoughts and experience and competences from other supervisory teams and other departments inside our organization. So when basically Doris and Karen both gave this broader overview how governments are dealing with fintechs, then we are not making any policies. So we are basically this one Perry in this bigger cluster who's trying to implement what Doris and Karen are, coming up with. This innovation hub, I think we ourselves in the organization, we see ourselves like innovation champions, known in this academic research, who are there to basically be between the fintechs and this traditional structure or traditional structures. Because we all know that if we have those disruptors and we have those traditional structures, traditional systems, then between them there's always this natural tension. And we're basically there to be in contact with fintech business models, business companies, startups. If we understand that they need a license from us, then we will basically forward them to the licensing process. But otherwise, they will stay in our innovation hub, and we have meetings with them and learn about their business models. And maybe to wrap it up, then what I see is that being this buffer inside the system between the fintechs and organization, this works well for us. I truly believe that this kind of innovation champions should be in place in every organizational, governmental organizations or entities who are, responsible for that job. And I also truly believe that it's needed that there's going to be this strategy that aligns together those different government entities to work in one direction. And we cannot expect that those entities will just figure out their roles and responsibilities by themselves. So.
Thank you so much, Maria. I mean, fascinating that you've set it up in that different way. I'm going to come back to you in a minute on what you think the benefits are of doing it in that way compared to maybe what other countries are doing. But I'm going to come to the audience in just a moment. But I want to come back to Karen and Doris just to ask a little bit more about the membership of the two groups that you mentioned, and also this idea of having to bring in different people from across organisations in the civil service. One of the things that's always difficult in civil services is to get collaboration and joined up working. So, fintech or not, kind of how do you overcome those challenges of silos within the civil service? And is the creation of these steering groups and these forums a way to try and bring different people together? Karen, come back to you on that.
Absolutely, and I was really glad to hear about Doris's experience, and I would nearly have liked to have had this conversation maybe 18 months ago, because there's a lot of validation, I think, across the two systems about how we're approaching it, so that's really comforting. And I think Doris has really highlighted the importance of ministerial backing for the project. It's very important, and I suppose that's one of the key elements of getting collaboration across the different silos, that it's led, there's political will behind it, as Doris said. So there was a slide there earlier in relation to the membership of the cross-government fintech steering group. I don't know if we can put it back up again. It might help put it on. Okay, so I'll maybe talk a little bit about the work of the group while we're getting that slide up. So I suppose I use this kind of term, there's 4 C's to describe the key work of the fintech steering group. So we coordinate on policy proposals across the various subsectors, like Doris mentioned, payments, crypto, investments, insurance and banking and so on. So we try to coordinate on policy proposals that impact fintech across the subsectors. We keep each other informed about developments in the particular areas and try to understand what the common themes are. And as far as practical, coordinate as best we can across all of the various elements. The other key element of the work is that we collaborate with industry, with the private sector. So that's the second C, and that would include researchers and academia. And to date, we've been using the Industry Advisory Committee and our contacts there to engage with the fintech community. This slide here, I think, is a good representation of how we organise the fintech steering group and the members of the group. As I mentioned there, in the inner circle there in blue is the internal department members. So they would all be senior managers, senior policy makers in each of those financial services sectors. And then the orange circle represents the cross-government members, and you will see there the government chief information officer is represented, Department of Further Education, because skills and training is so important in fintech, as some of the earlier speakers have mentioned. Consumer Protection Commission is there because one of the outcomes of the fintech steering group last year was the realization that we needed to educate consumers on how to use fintech and all of the risks that are there for consumers, and all of the benefits, of course, as well, and the opportunities. So the Consumer Protection Commission is a key member also of the cross-government group. Then we have our enterprise agencies, so that's Enterprise Ireland, so that encourages startups basically in fintech. It's one of the biggest venture capitalists in Europe, and I think globally in terms of investment in fintechs, startups. We have the IDA, which is the Industrial Development Agencies that attracts FDI firms into Ireland, Department of Enterprise, Department of Foreign Affairs that I mentioned earlier, and also the Central Bank is an observer with this fintech steering group, as Marie-Louise mentioned. They have an innovation hub similar to what Marie-Louise mentioned. We have Department of Communications that would look after things like the digital identity, along with the government chief information officer. So it's very much a cross-government membership. So we do try to, as I said, coordinate as best we can amongst ourselves. The Minister of State will chair the first meeting of the group, which is happening in a few weeks' time, and I think that's important to get collaboration and buy-in across government, across the civil service silos for that. And then we have a circle there representing the industry working groups, which we will also formally set up to formalise the informal consultation we've been having over the past year. So then in terms of what else we do in the fintech steering group, the other part of the work is we contribute, as I mentioned earlier, to the EU files on that are part of the digital finance package. We also communicate the role of the various actors across the ecosystem to industry. We then obviously research current market developments and future trends in fintech. We track strategic developments in the design of and operation of fintech in other jurisdictions, and explore the potential to build bridges with other jurisdictions, both inside and outside the EU, and that's why events like this are very welcome. As I mentioned earlier, we work very closely with the consumer education body, and we also have a review going on domestically at the moment in relation to retail banking, so it's important that we feed into that. So that's really a picture representation of the members of the group, if that helps.
Thanks, Kat. I mean, it certainly shows how broad this fintech ecosystem and landscape is. So Doris, similar question in terms of Germany. How hard is it to get the relevant officials in the room together? And also I was interested, you said some people kind of pass you things that are labelled fintech, but when you look at them, they're not necessarily fintech. Do you think there's a danger that we're kind of labelling everything as fintech at the moment?
Yes, indeed. And how we overcome silos is a topic and a challenge which goes beyond fintech in a way. And that is something we have to work on in any case, because a lot of problems are outside, are getting so complex that to provide as a government good solutions. We cannot stick to our responsibilities and our silos and say, well, this is me, that is you. We have to find new forms of cooperation and work, actually. And there's something where we're getting better, and especially under the new government. For the first time, we have also political awareness that we have to overcome silos of different ministries, that it's explicitly the will of the new government to have cross-ministerial working groups on certain issues, and digital identity is one of the issues which is quite prominent and obvious that not one ministry can solve this alone. However, with regard to the Ministry of Finance, we actually have an innovation lab within the ministry where we can also try out new working methods, and that goes along with collaboration. At the end, it's about changing the mindset how we work and would like to work together, and to be open enough to work with new working tools. And to have a room for that. And this innovation lab in the Ministry of Finance is a room where we can just be open enough to try new things, approach things in a way with the people which are all affected or which would like to contribute. That could also be an issue. And another important point is the question of, I think, training civil servants, but also, and training us to be to think about new methods and to think about new mindsets. What we have is two things in Germany. We have a kind of fellowship for leaders, which is like a digital fellowship, which brings together people from the civil service and the private community, but all over all sectors. It's cross-governmental, also with regard to the sectors participating, and where they have a 1-year fellowship which they can join, and where they learn about new technologies, but also new ways of leading, working, whatever. And that is helpful then, on the other way, also for us as a digital finance unit to work with our communities and colleagues. And another thing what we have is so-called governmental tech group, which helps us when we have certain projects where we think we could need some input from other experts outside the government, which are not civil servants by nature, so to say.
Thank you. So talking of civil servants by nature then, Marie-Lise, I mean, you mentioned you're kind of the buffer or the bridge between these two different kind of communities. Do you see that as the main benefit? Do you think you couldn't get that kind of truly innovative mindset within the civil service itself?
No, I wouldn't say that. But yeah, of course, it happens to be that people basically don't like innovation. Innovation brings up the uncertainties. And we have this Hofstede scale, if you compare the countries that are here represented, then basically what I can say is that in Estonia, the measure for Hofstede is the highest here. We're basically most uncertainty avoidance country here, and Ireland is having a very low measure there. So, and Germany, for example, is very close to us. So, I think that there is this, as I said, this tension. But I also, I'm really jealous if I share the panel with those bigger countries compared to Estonia. Then I always see that we are lagging behind. We don't have such great working groups that are dealing with fintech topics. You have a lot of different, competences, and as you said, those the technology groups working together. We see that in our government entities, this is a great challenge that we also need to add those new skill sets from technology side. We need people from IT sector. We need people from data science, machine learning, AI, blockchain, things like that. But I still have hope.
So maybe it's that a one size doesn't fit all. It depends on your national journey and where you are. Okay, we're going to throw this open to the floor. We have a couple of microphones in the room. Who would like to be the first person to ask a question? We have a question at the back. Seeing as we are a fintech and female panel, is there a woman in the audience that would like to ask the first question? Very cool. Okay, Ian. Oh yeah, we got Valentina first, and then Ian. Thanks, Valentina.
So thank you so much for sharing the work done, and it's great to see the ecosystem approach, consultation with the private sector. I would be interested on what was the biggest challenge you faced in establishing these working groups, cross-government and cross-country, actually. Thank you.
Thanks, Valentina. So the biggest challenge that you face, and I might add to that, although we have to keep the answers quite short because of time, but the biggest challenge you have faced and what you think the biggest challenges you will face will be as well. Doris, I'll come to you first.
Well, the biggest challenge we face is probably to raise everywhere the awareness that they are also affected by topics which have the name digital on it or fintech, even though their unit is not named like anything like that. So I think that's one of the biggest challenge, but that is also the thing which is changing rapidly at the moment. So we're having fast-growing awareness, changing awareness of being affected and being part of the topics we're dealing with.
And do you see that as being the challenge ahead? Is that the same thing?
Ahead, I think, will be the challenge, the biggest challenge to combine different initiatives. What I said is we have sector-specific initiatives on fintechs, and we have some on startups. We have them on national level. We have them on European level. And to combine these in a way to be somehow, of course, overlapping, but adding best to each other. I think that's one of the biggest challenges ahead.
Thanks, Joyce. Marie-Lise, your view on challenges?
Maybe in Estonian context, one challenge is that we should try to increase the support coming from our high-end leaders, so this strategical support. Then, of course, this in Estonian context, Estonia is really unique in that matter that we have really strong ICT cluster, and this actually means that we have a really large number of fintechs, and we see a lot of complex business models arising. And we're such a small country that we don't always have the resources to, be on top of that.
Challenge around resources. Karen?
I suppose the ongoing challenge for the group is working together, trying to figure out where does my sectoral work stop and where does the work of the department and the cross-sectoral group begin. And that's a constant challenge. And I suppose I find myself that I'm constantly trying to persuade people to collaborate and work together. And sometimes it's very easy to get set into one's silo, into one's mindset. Oh, we don't do this, we do that, and trying to convince people, well, perhaps you could do something a little different, and perhaps two people in the group need to work together on a particular project. So that's kind of the constant challenge in working together. But I find that that's really a feature of civil service work in general nowadays, the constant challenge of going outside your silo and working together collaboratively with colleagues on fintech and a lot of projects across government. But it's very much the most rewarding work, I suppose, is the cross collaboration between units, doing things differently for the benefit of our citizens. It's very rewarding work.
And it's interesting because civil servants very busy, so trying to ask people to lift their heads and look outside their immediate responsibilities.
Indeed.
It's not a small challenge. Just to be clear, I am very happy to hear from men in the room as well. I didn't want the men to feel like I don't want to hear from them. I absolutely do. We had Ian, and then we've got another lady down here. So Ian.
I was happy to hand on the mic to the lady in the front, but no, I can't resist going for it. Karen, I think, referred to, obviously this is kind of an EU panel where we're here with kind of EU nations, but Karen a little bit referred to the world beyond the EU as well. I'm just interested in your kind of 4 Cs approach, how you communicate with and engage with civil servants, policymakers and organisations that are located beyond the EU.
Thank you. So I think we'll take 2 questions then. So how are you communicating beyond the EU? And then down here, lady in the pink jacket.
I also have a question for Karen.
Hello, my name is Julia Chilikova. I'm from National Bank of Slovakia, and I have a very similar questions because thank you for the excellent presentation. You underlined the importance of cooperation in the local level, but I think that fintech on the technology are global, and we are all facing to the demand for the appropriate staff, for the demand for the expertise, and I would like to hear your opinion how to also make our network to more global than the local. I think that some kind of global approach could help us to be stronger partners. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. So those 2 questions actually go nicely together. So Karen, I'm going to come to you.
Thanks, Ian, for that question. I suppose things have been more difficult, shall we say, during the pandemic, and the inability to travel has really impacted on talking and engaging with other countries beyond Europe. In the past, wearing my Ireland for Finance strategy and recognising that fintech is a key element of that Ireland for Finance strategy, we have travelled to Asia in particular and Singapore, where we have linked up with Irish firms that export and sell their services abroad to give our message, let's say, and engage with policymakers and regulators in those countries. So America is a very important market for us, and Asia, and I suppose we're positioned in the right time zone to engage with the markets in both of those areas. We have an approach in Ireland which we call Team Ireland, where in other countries the foreign missions or the Department of Foreign Affairs works very closely and sometimes in the same building as our enterprise agencies. So we'd have the Enterprise Ireland and the in IDA together in offices with the Foreign Affairs, which makes it very collaborative and very easy to join up and sell our message, let's say, abroad. I know in the UK obviously is another important destination for our services, and we engage very much with the City of London and industry representative associations in Ireland to engage with them in that way. So I hope that's answered your question, but please feel free to approach me afterwards to talk about that maybe in some more detail. And I think the other lady at the front was asking about the network. How do you make it more global? And I suppose it is very much about using the Team Ireland network, mission network abroad, to link up with policymakers and indeed firms who are interested in buying services, shall we say, from Irish companies. So it's something that we've been doing for a number of years now. So we generally try to engage in trade missions as well. So the Minister of State has led the Ireland for Finance strategy for the past number of years, and has led trade missions abroad, where fintech would be one of the key elements of the trade missions. So so in short, we leverage off our foreign missions, let me say, in terms of getting our message abroad, if that makes sense.
Thanks. Doris, to what extent are you kind of trying to engage beyond the EU group?
Yeah, the traditional network is the G7 and the G20, of course, and with their experts group and their working groups, and I'm probably you are all aware that they're doing a lot of work on fintechs and new technologies, and be it crypto, and what have you on the level of the FSB. So that is there. It's an area where we're engaging very much in the working groups, and it's somehow the traditional format in which you have global work and global standards and global exchange, of course, with all the difficulties on G20 level it currently has. However, and then that is also why we have currently the G7 presidency in Germany. And if you look on the agenda of our finance minister, you can see that, for example, digitalization, especially with regard to CBDC and its potential cross-border use, is one of the priorities as well. So that is a level on engagement which underlines that we, of course, do see the need to have a global cooperation and interaction on digital topics. We also, our central bank has a focus on the engagement of big techs in finance, which is also a global phenomenon. And then we have, of course, bilateral contacts at the Ministry of Finance. That is more on a case-by-case basis. We have exchanges with India, for example, on working level, and with Asia in general, but also in every country which is interested, which approaches us. Yeah.
Thanks, Rose. Marie-Lise, do you have a global as well as a kind of domestic and European focus?
Beyond Europe, we're not attached that much, but inside Europe, we belong to 8 different fintech working groups, and of course we see it really beneficial that we have this EU-wide knowledge behind our back.
Right. And also, I mean, just to note, obviously, I think Ian had identified that there are relatively few kind of fora where you can bring different governments together to discuss fintech. So that's part of what we're doing here today, and hopefully this is just the start of many more of these kind of collaborations as well. I think we've got time for 1 or possibly 2 more questions before we break.
Can I have my
coffee.
question?
Oh, yes, sorry, you had a question for Karen as well. We have a question to Karen.
I was just curious about this closeness to UK. UK has this really fancy fintech center. Is this affecting you somehow?
I suppose the short answer to the question is yes. The UK and Ireland would have similar financial systems and similar industry models a lot of the time in relation to financial services. So I suppose when the UK left the EU, a number of firms needed a solution to the fact that they would no longer be able to passport their services across the EU. So I think Ireland was the solution for a number of those firms. We were probably the biggest destination for those firms. So there is very much similarities in terms of the ecosystem, I think, between Ireland and the UK. And I think I travelled to London in November, and we had a similar workshop, shall we say, on fintech. And again, I was really delighted to hear about all of the elements that they are working on, all of the various parts of the ecosystem, and how it very much mirrored what we were doing in Ireland. And again, I would have liked to have had that conversation maybe 12 months ago before I set up the structures in Ireland, because it is great to have that kind of validation. So I think that's a kind of a relationship that we continue to have with the UK. We like to keep close contacts with our nearest neighbour. I think that's important. Because there are so many symbiotic opportunities between the 2 jurisdictions in terms of investor opportunities and services between the 2 financial centres.
Thanks a lot. So, anyone have yep, over here.
Thank you, Ian Cullen from Bankish, and I wanted to bring it back to something that that Marie-Lise mentioned very briefly before, but I think that is a very important distinction between fintech and fintech, whereas the ones that require licensing are the ones, and the other ones of the types of fintechs who enable the ones in financial services that require licensing. So first of all, do you in your programs and your working groups have distinction between fintech and fintech? And second of all, do you see also licensing or sorts of regulatory standards being imposed also on top of the enablers of the scene? Thanks.
Great question. Marie-Lise.
Actually, in our organization, we even start seeing this problem that actually those fintechs, they need even different approach in this licensing process. Basically, we see two challenges. One is that from one side, they are not able to approach those capital requirements. At the same time, there are some risks that are even stronger or higher than for different traditional financial services companies. And there we clearly see that we need to add those additional requirements and rules. We in our innovation hub usually deal with fintechs that they don't have any rules, and that's the main reason why they come to us. They want to be sure that they are free to continue their activities, and of course, we do distinguish those two.
Doris.
In the Digital Finance Forum, we do not distinguish between licensed and unlicensed. That's why we call it digital finance, not fintech. However, licensing is a big issue when it comes to fintech, also in Germany, and it's a big issue, especially our supervisory authority is working on or is dealing with exactly the issues you mentioned. It's about, do I need a license or not? That is, of course, a big thing. Also the question about this kind of, we call it umbrella licensing, so to say. So fintechs offering their license to other services, tech services in the financial sectors to then operate under their license. That is also an issue. However, that's nothing which is in focus in the Digital Finance Forum itself. But of course, licensing issues are always big ones.
Thanks,
including the passporting, of course, the pros and cons.
Karen, your thoughts on this?
I think it's a really good question. Where does the regulatory perimeter end is constantly on our minds, let's say, as policymakers and as regulators. And I think it's constantly shifting. And as Marie-Louise said, it's something that is a feature of the Central Bank Innovation Hub. Is this a regulated activity? Will I need a license? And I suppose the Innovation Hub that the Central Bank operates is a great opportunity for them to learn about the new developments that are out there, the tech enablers that are there, and any learnings I think should come through to policymakers in terms of, well, perhaps this is something that we should look at regulating perhaps in the future. So it's very important that we learn from the inquiries, the type of firms, the type of technology that is going to the Central Bank Innovation Hub as policymakers, and that's going to be an ongoing journey, absolutely.
Thank you so much. Is your concern that the regulation is going to start kind of spreading? Is that?
Not really a concern, but it might be an unpopular opinion, but I do think that tech enablers should be some sort of go through some sort of evaluation themselves as well, and not for the reason of them becoming regulated, but my personal opinion is that it would increase the trust between the traditional financing sector as well as for the new innovative solutions coming to the market, and hence empower the adoption of innovation. So that was my drift around this.
Thank you. Well, I think that's a really good note to end on, because I think that issue is probably going to come up again throughout the day, and we can also carry on that conversation over coffee. We have now, I think, reached our first coffee break of the morning. So I just want to say a really big thank you to our first panel of the day. I think it's really set the scene for the conversations for the rest of the day today. Thank you so much to Karen, to Doris, to Marie-Louise for sharing your expertise with us.